Okay, we are now doing the fourth in a long series of video interviews with prominent foresters in the state of Georgia. And you are looking at one Charles B. Place Jr., Chuck Place to all those that know him and love him. So, Mr. Chuck.
Sir.
Good to have you with us tonight. We're sitting at the FFA camp between Jackson and Covington, Georgia. And Chuck and I have been at this camp, for about 17 years. And it's been a good time. So I'd like to start off, Chuck, by you telling me where you were born, a little bit about your upbringing, at your leisure.
Okay. Don't look for the records. They may not exist. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, on Mother's Day, May 8th, 1927, at the Bay Ridge Sanitarium, which was a private hospital, as my mother was a professional nurse at that time. She had done her time as a World War I Army nurse. Dad was an inspector with the Army Air Corps, and the first job I remember him having was putting pontoons on the Air Force Martin B-10, which was a bomber, and that was put on by Edo Float Company in College Point, New York, where I spent kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, tried third grade again. And we were right at the foot of where they put the World Fair in 1939.
Oh, okay, I've heard of that.
That was built on the Flushing Meadows, which was a dump, a city dump on Long Island. And they pushed that up, filled it up with garbage and so forth, which is now the site of LaGuardia Airport.
Oh.
But we had an exciting time of it. We would visit the park. There was a city park there that had a mansion on it, which was Mayor LaGuardia's retreat.
Fiorello L. LaGuardia.
Fiorello, yes. And one of the things I remember about him, he read the funny papers to us on the radio on Sunday morning.
That's something.
Yeah, it is, because you'd had the funny papers there, and you could follow along with the text on the balloons and so forth. Yeah. Mother worked for Lily Tool Cup Corporation, which was a competitive Dixie Cup, and she was an industrial nurse at that time. So I'm not a good subject to talk about the Depression, because we were very, very fortunate. I was very fortunate in that both parents were working and we were paying our bills. Where many of my classmates, they were literally hungry from the Depression. In fact, the Board of Education, whoever had charge of it, we would have a break in the morning and have a half pint of milk and a chocolate-covered graham cracker. But we had to pay our penny for that, which was, I'm sure, something to illustrate and let us know that you paid for things. It wasn't a free lunch. That was impressive.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Well, and I can remember, we had alligators at our show tonight, and people don't know about this, but our principal went to Florida and brought back an alligator when I was in third grade. So I got to see an alligator in the flesh, in third grade. Well, Dad got transferred then to Buffalo, New York. We went there to finish up an aircraft building program, which I think Curtiss Wright picked up from Boeing. And why this happened, I have no idea. But we graduated then. This was 1937, and it was evident that we were going to go to war. Walter Winchell put it pretty clearly on the radio. Ladies and gentlemen, all the ships at sea. And he would talk about particularly the danger of the Japanese. Well, Dad had a program with Bell. Well, there were two aircrafts company that competed, Bell Aircraft and Curtiss Wright. Curtiss Wright had a beautiful airplane called the YIA-18. And they didn't call it another aircraft, it was a YIA-18. It was a twin-engine ship. It had pilot and co-pilot, and it had a rear gunner. Had sort of an elongated kind of cockpit. It was a beautiful airplane. They built 13 of them, and then they progressed on to other aircraft. Bell Aircraft, they built an airplane that I didn't agree with. They called it the Aircuda. And it was sort of weird because it was one engine, and they used pusher engines, and had a crew of 4. In the front of each engine, there was a machine gun position. And then they had the pilot and co-pilot, and they had a rear gunner, if I remember right. That was the XFM-1. And that was never produced in quantity. Oh man, I've got so much Air Corps. Because the Air Corps was really building up at that time. And there was a radial engine called a P-36. That was a pretty airplane. It was, we sold a lot of them to France. And that was a forerunner of a P-40. And you look at when one would compare the configuration of the fuselage with a P-36 and a P-40, it was a P-36 fuselage with a 12-cylinder liquid-cooled Allison engine that made up the P-40.
With all your great interest in airplanes and what your father did, Chuck, why did you aspire to get into the Air Force and do some engineering or work on planes?
No. I aspired to work on airplanes. That was sort of built in. I wanted to be a Marine. I guess I was about 5 years old, and I was given a picture book for a child. I guess I was maybe 3rd grade. And it had soldiers and sailors, and then there was this other guy. And I asked my mother what this is all about, and she said, well, the sailors fight in the ocean, and the soldiers fight on the land. And I said, well, what about this other guy? Oh, that's a Marine. They fight on land and sea. I want to be one. Well, that set my goal. To
5 years old.
Yeah. And I built all kinds of airplane models. The Spitfire was one of my favorites, which was a British plane. Oh, it was a beautiful aircraft. And of course, I literally grew up with the P-40 through the various stages of the P-40 as they changed it as time went on. And it's hard to describe how many airplanes were made. They just kept going and going and going. And of course, the P-40 was the the preferred model for Claire Chennault and his Flying Tigers.
Yep.
And that's of course, we got to go back now in history is where Claire went to college.
Claire went to college at Louisiana State University.
Yep. And what is their,
Tigers.
the Tigers.
They are the Tigers.
Therefore, the
And you're-
Flying Tigers.
And that's how the Flying Tigers got to be the Flying Tigers, as opposed to some other kind of animal. Because Claire went to... Who was named first? Was the Tigers mascot named after him, or did he adopt that when he started the group?
Afterward.
Okay.
Afterward.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of people think of Bob Scott as a flying tiger, but Bob Scott was not a flying tiger. Bob Scott, of course, he's the guy that wrote God Is My Co-Pilot.
Yes.
And he flew P-40s, there's no doubt about that.
I met him once at Warner Robins at the
You did?
museum. At the museum.
He was a very nice guy. Very nice guy. And
So for people that are not from our generation, you want to give a brief history of who Claire Chennault was? Since you mentioned Claire Chennault?
yeah, he was a pilot in the Air Corps. And like Air Corps and Army's the same way. You, if you're passed over for promotion once, it's hard to stay in. And I guess he was passed over twice, so he was piped out of the Air Corps. And that's when he teamed up with Chiang Kai-shek in China.
That would be the late 1930s?
Yeah. About 1937 or 1938, Chennault came over here, and he got the ferry pilots who were flying the P-40 from the manufacturing in Buffalo, New York, to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, which was another interesting incident. That's where he got his original Flying Tigers. They were mercenaries, strictly mercenaries. And I was in high cotton, as they say here in Georgia, Bill. I did love aircraft, there's no doubt about it, because I wanted to be an aircraft mechanic. And a group of these guys from the Air Corps, they had already resigned and signed up with Chennault and Curtis Wright in Buffalo, treated them to a going away dinner, and I got to go.
You got to go to that?
I got to go. Well, I had met these pilots, and of course, talk about being in the high cotton. Oh, and I never learned one of their names. I never got one of them to sign the manual or anything. I just was too captured with them. And off they went to China. I skipped one point. It was a P-36. That was the Forerunner. I mentioned that a little bit earlier here this evening. That was a radial engine with, let's see, it was a twin Pratt & Whitney engine with, by golly, I think that was 18 cylinders. And one of the other things that happened, Dad was very meticulous, and he was final approval of these aircraft. And there was one particular model that he wouldn't okay for flight. He would not okay it, and he was overridden by Wright Field. They had a uniformed representative of the Air Corps in Buffalo at that time. His name was Simonin. He was a Major Simonin, and he was ordered to fly this airplane to Wright Field. And I remember this vividly because Dad missed Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday morning. After working on that airplane, he told the pilot, Major Simonin, he said, "Red, when this thing quits, turn it over and fall out and hit the silk." That's how the man took the airplane off. And I'm convinced this guy was a hero before the war. Because he took off, the engine quit, and he landed dead stick in a pumpkin field. He saved the airplane so that they could do the research and find out what in the world was wrong with it and correct it. And that's why I think he is such a hero. He knew when he took off what he was going to do. He had every confidence that airplane was not going to get to right field. And he picked his place, put it down, and to me that
is pretty amazing.
yeah.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school in Burgard Vocational High School in Buffalo. And like I said, I have a charmed life because they taught aviation mechanics. Now, I am not a good student, never was. I couldn't pass the exam to get in that school. There was another school that taught machine shop, and I flunked that entrance too. All my grade school teachers, they were all for me. They did everything. So, the principal, Miss Brown, she said, "Well, Chuck, why don't you go to Burgard and try this thing again?" So I went down, and by golly, they accepted me. So I was due to learn aviation mechanics. I was a good mechanic. I just couldn't pass the test. And I enjoyed every minute of it. And of course, now as a forester, I look back on it, I hated Arbor Day. I didn't want to go out and watch him in the snowstorm stick that stick in the ground. I wanted to be in my warm shop working on my airplanes. I guess that's why I claim that I'm a forester, because God wanted me to be one.
Yep.
I put up with quite an argument. But it was a great education. Great education. I got to work on all kinds of airplanes. I got to work on a P-36. We had one at the school, and we had a parents' night, and I was able to finagle myself into the cockpit, and I could raise the. It was on stilts, and I could raise the landing gear and turn the propeller and all, wiggle the controls. Oh, that was great.
When I interviewed Bill Barton, he served in the war, and he served over in Belgium, and he was there for the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh.
I could not get him to tell me anything about the battle itself.
Yeah.
I specifically said, "Have you got memories you want to share?" And he says, "I've got memories, but I don't wish to share them."
Uh-huh.
You were at home during the war. You were in high school during the war.
That's right.
What specific wartime memories do you have of, rationing or anything like life at home during World War II in Buffalo, New York?
Fatherless. He was at the airport, taking care of airplanes. Now, that's a pretty broad statement, because he involved me in his work. I would go to the airport and I'd go over the airplanes, and I'd have a big time. I mean, man, I had a privileged seat to watch these aircraft. And my buddy and I, we would ride our bicycles to the airport. It was 4 miles from our house, and watch the airplanes take off. And all those P-40 pilots, they were so hot. If they didn't suck up their gears, they'd have hit the fence. They just poured it to them, and clear the fence, and away they were gone. And these many of them ended up as Flying Tigers. Now that's Chenault's Flying Tigers, not after the U.S. got in the war.
Yep. So to finish off the Claire Chenault story, he worked for Chiang Kai-shek, and China was very short on supplies, and by this time Japan controlled the China Sea. So he needed to get his supplies from an ally, or a neutral country at any event, and that would be India.
Yeah.
So Claire Chennault and the Tigers flew these aircraft from India to China over the hump, which was the Himalayas, between India and China, and that's the hump. That's what
Yes,
Claire Chennault did.
right.
Heroes. Heroes supplying China. Okay, so I remember my parents talking about blackouts. I remember them having to close the windows on their, shut the blinds during certain blackout days, and they talked about stamps that had to be issued and not being able to get coffee and all that. Do you have any memories of that?
Every block had a block marshal, and he wore a white hat and would patrol all night long, making sure that people had their windows blocked up so no lights would show. And of course he was a fire marshal to watch for fire and other things that might happen in the black of night with no lights on any place. As far as oh golly, stamps. We had to have stamps for shoes. We got, I think we got two pair of shoes a year. And I know that I had to forsake my dress shoes for my basketball shoes. Like I say, that I was so privileged because of one reason or another. We always had good food, and we didn't pay too much attention. We tried to obey the rules. And I worked at a gas station during the time, and no telling how many contraband stamps I took for gas. I couldn't tell a good one from a bad one. And besides that, when usually it was a Sunday afternoon when people would fill up their gas, well, not fill up, but get their gas stamp ration, and they'd be lined up, and you try to get them off the ramp for the gas pumps, and I suppose I took some bad stamp, but I couldn't tell a good one from a bad one.
Okay, so it's the end of your senior year. It's June of 1945, and did you get recruited to join?
Oh, I had a terrible, heart-wrenching experience, Bill. It's strongly established I wanted to be a Marine. Well, my folks wanted me to graduate from high school. And at that time, the Marine Corps, you had to sign up when you were 17.
Oh.
If you were within 30 days of your 18th birthday, you had to register for the draft. Well, my birthday, as we've learned, is in May. Graduation was in June. So I had to sign up in March. And I went down and I went through everything. I got to tell you about my hearing. Not the best in the world. And I was with several thousand other naked guys running around, going through the physical, because we were mixed in with those who were going to be drafted, and it ranged from probably 16, some guys that were too young, to many guys that were old. And I went in for my ear test, and there was a corpsman sitting at this desk, and he said, go down in this long room and stand at that white line and tell me what I say. So he said something, he mumbled, and I didn't understand it. And I said, well, will you repeat that? So he said something else, and I said, well, I didn't quite get that. He said, yeah, will you, one more time? And he said it again, and I said, go on, you can hear. He didn't know I'd paid him to pass me.
Oh, you paid him?
No, I didn't pay him, but I would have.
Oh.
I never understood what he said.
You were meant to be a Marine.
So, this is not the end of the story, because I was all ready to sign the papers, and I asked the captain, I said, well, now, if I get sworn in, when do I leave? He said, Saturday.
Oh, gee.
Whoa! this was March. So I broke down. I bawled all the way home. I wanted to be a Marine. Went in the pardon me. Went in the house crying. Mother was upset. I went in my room and I cried. Dad came home. And mother reported. Excuse me. And he said, well, what did you suffer? He calmed me down. He said, well, Chuck, why don't you go down and talk to the captain in the morning? So I did. And I told the captain that I wanted to be a Marine, but I didn't graduate from high school until the 26th of June, and therefore I didn't want to sign up. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll get you sworn in and put your papers over here, and if I can meet my quota, I won't call you up. I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal. So he called in this WR, a woman Marine lieutenant, and she took me to her office and swore me in. Now that was a funny feeling when she stuck out her hand and said, congratulations, Marine. So I was duly sworn in, hanging on the edge. And by golly, I did graduate on the 26th, but I think it was somewhere around the 15th or the 16th I got a letter that I would leave on July 2nd.
So you were set.
So I was set. I got to graduate, and I got to go to Parris Island. That was another trip, but yeah.
So you were in Parris Island in August of 1945,
That's correct.
when the bombs were dropped.
That's correct.
And what were your feelings then?
Utter disappointment. I'd waited for 4 years, and I wasn't alone. We were going to Japan, and the bubble burst. Not that we weren't appreciative of it, but we were pretty well cocked and primed. We were going to even it up with those guys. Mm-hmm. Not a good thought, but I think that was pretty generally the thought of all the guys in boot camp at that time. Now, Bill, I've had some arguing with some historians about the population, but we were graduating 3,000 Marines a week. The training was 9 weeks. Simple arithmetic. That's 27,000 troops on Parris Island at one time. Now that's in conflict with some of the reports that I've read about history, but I was there. You couldn't stir them with a stick.
Ready to go.
And they were ready to go. I mean, they were all volunteers. Mm. Now, I shouldn't say that. That's pretty broad. Because the Corps had started to draft. And that was not fair either, because the guys that got drafted were, many of them that I had met were adult men with children at home. And that wasn't good.
Yep. Well, let's move ahead.
All right.
In the service, how many years did you serve?
14 months.
14 months.
Because when they dropped the bomb, I was surplus. Yeah, we had, they started to cut back right away.
Where did you go?
I went to Cherry Point. I was supposed to go to aviation mechanics school.
That's in New Jersey?
No, that's North Carolina.
Cherry Point, North Carolina.
Cherry Point, North Carolina. It's still an air base for the Marine Corps. And when I got there, the schools were closed to to mechanics, and I went into a guard company. So I stood guard company on the ammo dump at Cherry Point for about 6 months. And then I was, I might have mentioned WR, Women's Reserve. Now, most of the WRs were typists at headquarters in Washington, D.C. So there were 6 of us guys that were PFCs, and they sent us to Washington to replace the women Marines. So that was a good job. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot about Washington, D.C. I had a good time there.
And you retyped some things. What did you retype?
What did I?
Well, what were you typing? What kind of things from the end of the war were you typing?
Mostly mustering out records.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't type. I didn't get to typing school. We were alphabetizing, mustering out payment 3x5 cards.
Makes sense.
Thousands of them.
Yep. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to the end of your service. What happened then? 1947? This is about 1947?
I was discharged in 46.
46.
August of 46.
Okay.
And by this time I had pretty well decided that I could go to college. When that wasn't in the books when I went to high school.
With the GI Bill.
With the GI Bill. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course the schools were all closed up with GIs that were ahead of me, which is fine with me, but I took that time to go back to high school and learn some of the things that I didn't qualify for where I went to high school, because I didn't have chemistry, I didn't have English, I didn't have mathematics. See, I took trade math, and the same way with the mathematics as it applied to the trade of a mechanic. So I didn't have these academic qualifications for college. And I did postgraduate work in high school. Oh, and that's where I met my wife. She had the prettiest legs. And, we got married in 1947. And I continued to pursue getting through high school, and then I found out that I could qualify for the New York State Ranger School rather than college, and that was another turn that was very beneficial for me, because that was basic, where I learned the woods. We spent the time in the woods. The philosophy of the Ranger School was, if you cannot find your recreation in the forest, you don't need to be here. And it was a very strenuous course, and it still is an excellent course in surveying.
I understand you always go back as often as you can to the New York State Ranger School reunions.
Yeah, we have
Tell me about that over the years.
Yeah, we have a reunion the first weekend in August, and we all turn out, which is very nice to watch the school grow, and it has grown tremendously.
So you learned your cruising there?
Did
you
I?
learned your cruising there?
Yeah. Oh, it was very thorough, especially surveying. And like I say, the philosophy was, if you can't get your recreation in the woods, go home. That was the whole philosophy, and it was centered on building woods crew foremen, that they could take a crew of men in the woods and accomplish what the professional forester prescribed for that particular stand of timber. And that's been invaluable to me as a supervisor. I had the basics of it. And that's where I got them.
How long is the course at the New York State?
It was 44 weeks. And there, again, God smiled on me. Dubauer was the director, and he was a fantastic forester. I think he was a graduate of Michigan. And that was another thing. This all falls together, Bill, because when I finished at the Ranger School, I ended up in Michigan, and he turned me loose early so I could make the spring semester at Michigan, and that's when I started. And again, I was not prepared for college. I was not that good. So
you went to forestry school at the University of Michigan?
Yes.
In 1947?
No, it was later than that.
48. You went to 47, 44 weeks. That would have put you there in 48, at least.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And then Michigan didn't think I was smart enough, so I went to work for American Airlines to pay for my college because I lost my GI Bill when I failed out. So then I went to Eastern Michigan. Now Eastern Michigan had a tie-in with the university. They had a pre-forestry course. So that's where I got my Bachelor of Science at Eastern Michigan University. And meanwhile, I was working for American Airlines, and I had been with American for 4 years. And going back to my Ranger School training, I was very fortunate in that American smiled on me, and I was a trick foreman. So when the regular foreman had a day off, I stepped in for him and ran the crew. And that was exciting. It had a good crew.
You mean like loading and unloading planes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went to school at Michigan, Eastern Michigan, while you were working for American Airlines. And what city is Eastern Michigan in Michigan?
Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti.
Ypsilanti is about 4 miles east of Ann Arbor. And in fact, I lived in Ann Arbor. I lived on a farm there. And would commute to Ypsilanti. And that's Greek. It's not Indian. I got in quite an argument with some guy who said that's Indian. I said, no, it's Greek.
When did you finish at Eastern Michigan?
50, 55? Yeah.
55.
I was 55. I went to summer school until I got mine.
And you were having babies then too?
I was having babies too. My
Yeah.
my oldest was born in 53. And in fact, he was born in the University Maternity Hospital in Ann Arbor.
Okay, so you graduate in 1955 and you begin your forestry career.
Well, there was a delay there. Jobs were hard to find. And we didn't do like they do today, as I understand, have a, what do they call it, you send out
Resumes?
resumes. We didn't, that wasn't even thought about. I wrote 300 letters to various outfits trying to find a job. And I was to the point that if I hadn't found a job in forestry by, what was my date? I think it was June 1st, that I would have stayed with American. And I would have. I would have enjoyed it. I had my application in for Phoenix, Arizona. And got a letter from a guy with the Meade Corporation in Kingsport, Tennessee. this goes back to the Ranger School, because he was a Ranger School graduate and a Michigan graduate. And that's where I started with me in Kingsport. And at that time, it was a white paper company, a white paper machine. We only used hardwood and produced a good bit of the Wanakina brand of McGraw-Hill Publishing Company. And that was a very good experience. I learned a lot about the South and the people of the South.
What was your job?
Scaling pulpwood on the yard. And the boss was a real nice guy. And when I wasn't busy, I could wander about the mill. So I got a good grounding of paper mill. The whole operation, from A to Z. And met the farmers that would bring it in. I gotta say this, we were buying peeled hardwood. And they don't teach you how to identify peeled hardwood in college.
No bark.
No bark. And the boss came up and he said, "Chuck," he said, "we don't buy Buckeye." Oh, I gotta teach you how to identify Buckeye without its hide. So he took me out and he told me that if I would look at this nice milky white cross section with a pink pitch, that was Buckeye. And we didn't buy Buckeye because of it would gum up the paper machine. We bought a lot of other kinds of species, but not Buckeye. And of course, at that area, the preferred was yellow poplar. And of course, I got to meet the guys that did the harvesting in the woods, and if you can imagine the work that was to knock down that tree and then take the bark off, load it on some kind of a truck, which...
They peeled it in the woods?
They peeled it in the woods.
Wow.
And our objective was to get 1,000 cords for the winter run. And I guess we did. I guess we got the 1,000 cords.
How long did you work at Kingsport?
I was only there 6 months. It was a part-time job.
Oh, okay.
I was to do this, scale this peeled hardwood that came in for that stock. Otherwise, we bought other kinds of wood. We bought veneer cores from whoever was making some kind of wood veneer, hardwood veneer. The core, of course, on the lathe, you had a bolt that was probably somewhere about 4 inches diameter. And we would get this by the carload off the railroad of these veneer cores.
So that was 1955, the last half of?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chips were not considered. We chipped at the mill, but they were not chipping out in the woods like they do today.
Then I remember you telling me you went to Alabama.
Yeah. Of course, that I was only hired for the summer, and then I got a job with Kimberly Clark in Coosa. Well, it was at Coosa River Newsprint Company at that time, and I was a woods crew foreman for them, and worked in Clay County, which incidentally has the highest mountain in Alabama, which is Cheahaw.
Cheahaw Mountain, yep.
And that. You remember the turpentine cup that was folded like a paper boat?
Yes, I do. I remember you showing that to me and telling me it was from Cheahaw Mountain.
Yeah, that's where I found it. That they had worked the longleaf at Cheahaw at one time.
Just shows you the extent of longleaf.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's right. And there again, I learned so much about the land and the people that would work there. I never had any trouble with acclimating with them. They accepted me, and we went along with it. And of course, that job was a summertime job again. We were doing inventory work, which was very nice. I ran the inventory crews. I had 6 men on my crew, 2 men to an inventory crew, and they would cruise the inventory during the day, and I'd pick them up and take them out and see that they were doing things the way they were supposed to do or trained to do.
That was the summer of '56.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So then I ended up out of work. And then I went to the Department of Forests and Parks in Maryland. And that was, again, a very exciting part of my experience, because I was in Westminster, Carroll County. I had the western part of Baltimore County and all of Carroll County. And at that time, Carroll County was, I think it was the 4th most wealthy county in the United States. And one of their products, no one can tell me what it was. It was worm seed.
Worm seed.
Worm seed. I never saw the plant, but they had fields where they would have a distillery out in the middle of the field, and they would collect this worm seed and extract the oil, and that was sent to a pharmaceutical in New York City, and they made worm medicine for GIs, to deworm the GI.
Oh.
And I've never learned exactly what kind of plant that is. I never saw the plant. All I saw were these distilleries out in the field.
So what did you do for the Department of Parks in Maryland? Forests and Parks in Maryland?
Farm forester.
Oh.
Serving the public. In managing their timber. And there, one of my clients was national recognition. His name was Whittaker Chambers, and if the historians know who Whittaker was, he was the writer that hid the papers in these pumpkins in the field. And I was called to his farm to look at his timber and advise him on what to do. So there was
just for history, because not many people are going to know that. What were those papers reportedly?
it was. I just read about it. Something to do with communists in
Algier Hiss.
Yeah.
And Whittaker Chambers.
Yeah.
There was a connection between those papers and Algier Hiss.
Yeah. You know more about it than I do, but
And,
I just don't remember it. But that's right.
And that was one of the things that Richard Nixon used to be able to win the, 1946?
Yeah.
No, that was 1956.
Well, he'll turn on.
1956. This was 1956. So those are one of the things he used in House of Un-American Activities. And
Something like that. Yeah, like I say, that I have not followed up the history of him. I just know that I looked at his property, pardon me, and his wife was outstanding because she had the roughest hands of any woman I've ever shaken hands with. She was a tremendous gardener, and she never wore gloves. He just got in there with the soil and dug around and had these rough hands from gardening.
actually, just to correct the record, I'm thinking that was after the fact. If he had served any time, it would have been before that. 1946, 7 and 8. That's when all that stuff about Algier Hiss and giving up the atomic secrets. they blamed him for giving up the atomic secrets and how Russia and China got the bomb. That was part of it. Maybe the secrets were on the papers that
Yeah.
were buried in the pumpkin.
Yeah, that could be.
Somehow connected with the atom bomb and,
Yeah.
and all that, and yeah, because they were
Yeah,
they were tried as spies.
He was retired there
By
at,
that time. Yeah.
and like I say, anybody in that county who had land was a very wealthy person.
All right, Mr. Chuck, we've got to move to the Georgia Forestry Commission.
Okay.
When did you start with them?
Oh, good gracious.
By now we're up to 1957, when you worked in Maryland.
Let me think a moment on that one. You think I'd have it right down to the gnat's eyelash. When I was at Coosa River, there was a guy by the who was a Georgia graduate, and he knew that I was part-time with Coosa River, and he said, "Why don't you look into the Georgia Forestry Commission?" I never even thought of that. So I came to Macon looking for a job. And they were in a flux. If we hadn't been burning off the Okefenokee swamp, I would have probably stayed on with Meade. But they were too busy with this feeding their mills and with this fire going along in the Okefenokee swamp. Now that's been overshadowed by the recent fire down there. But at that time, that fire had burned for 2 years.
2 years, 1955 to 57? Because that started in 55.
Yeah, 2 years. Sure did. And now wait a minute, I'm losing something here in the sequence of time. Of course, I was looking for a job, and Walt suggested I contact the Forestry Commission. And I went in fat, dumb, and happy. I didn't know anything about it. Well, no, there's another step. I went to Kraft in Macon, see if I could get a job there. And they didn't want me at that moment. But they suggested the Forestry Commission. So I stopped in at the Forestry Commission. I didn't know where I was or what I was doing. And the Forestry Commission was in flux also because they were moving their headquarters from Atlanta to Macon and building a forestry center there at Macon. And of course that was built with the proceeds from the salvage of the Okefenokee swamp fire. So I went to the shop, they directed me to the shop, and this guy was the associate director of the commission. He was setting up the offices for the commission's move. Buddy Hargraves was the guy's name.
Buddy Hargraves, Dean of UGA.
Yeah, that's right. He left the commission and went to work teaching. Great guy, just a really great guy. And I didn't know who he was. I didn't know him from Adam. So he said, well, Chuck, he said, we might have a job, but you're going to have to take a test. I said, well, I'm ready. So he called state in Atlanta and set it up. So I went to Atlanta and took the test for the Forestry Commission. And I went back to, I was living in Ashland. I was living in Ashland, Alabama. And I got a phone call, and this guy said, I'm Frank Craven, and I understand you're interested with a job with the Forestry Commission.
And that's the way it began.
Yeah, God was smiling on me then. Frank was a great guy. He was district forester in Rome. And he said, we're in Rome and we're covered up with Yankees. Would you like the job? Oh, man. So I went to Rome. And he was the district forester. There was another forester, and he was a little pest. His name was A.J. Cody. And then there was a big guy by the name of Floyd Hubbard. This guy was a Texan, but he had Pennsylvania Dutchman behind him. And then we had a feisty investigator who was a Marine. and the radio technician was just a great guy, Red Robinson. And I can still hear him whistling into the radio as he would adjust the radios.
All right. Now I'm gonna move you along here.
Okay, go ahead.
And I know that your career took you to Macon, and you were an information an officer.
Yeah, well, it was Frank. He came up and had a meeting with the district forester at that time, who was, well, that's not important, but he offered me the job to Macon as a forest education assistant.
Forest education assistant.
Yeah, that was the title.
Okay. And over the years, you told me you really led a lot of workshops.
Yes.
Tell me about some of the workshops.
Well, let's go back a little bit, because Frank, as chief, he headed up the FFA forestry camp.
Okay.
For the state of Georgia. And he got me as one of his instructors. And one of the other instructors was Cody, as I already mentioned, and we have a long-standing friendship with Cody. But we taught at the, now I misspoke, that wasn't FFA, that was not extension, vocational forestry. And the pulp mills of Georgia financed this camp for 100 boys, and we moved from one state park to another for a week in the summertime. And that's where I really got to teaching with forestry. And then it branched from there because the Georgia chapter of the Soil Conservation Society, they started a week-long conservation workshop for boys. That first one was held at Berry College in Rome, Georgia. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, Berry College in Rome. And then that moved from there to ABAC in, where's ABAC?
Tifton.
Tifton.
One of the foresters you had about 1963 at the vocational camp was who? One of the young boys, not a forester, one of the young boys.
Oh my goodness, yeah. That was Billy Lancaster. I don't remember him as a student. I only remember Billy that he was a forester, and we had a society there meeting in Macon. And this guy climbs out of his car and he said, "Well, that's Chuck Place." And I was just taken aback because I hadn't realized that he had grown up and become a forester.
And he'd remembered you, and he'd always said that one of the reasons he became a forester was because of that camp.
Yeah.
And it's to his tribute that in 1989, along with another group of Okmulgee chapter foresters, he got them together and started this camp, which is where we're sitting tonight.
That's right.
And this is our 20th year.
Yeah.
So hooray for Billy.
Billy Lancaster.
And hooray for you for teaching him. Hooray, hooray.
Oh, yeah, it's been exciting, Bill. Very exciting.
You did a lot of teacher workshops, Chuck.
Yeah, we had one running. I think we ran that thing for something like 13 years. And this was on a graduate level for school teachers. And we taught at Valdosta State College, at Shorter College, and we had a couple of weeks over at Carrollton in teaching it. Now these were mostly school teachers, practicing school teachers, working on their graduate degrees. And that was very successful, very successful. It was supported by, a lot of it was supported by the Garden Club of Georgia. They paid these teachers for their tuition and so forth to attend the school. And we got out, we did all kinds of stuff. The Okefenokee Swamp and various industries would take us into their paper mills and their sawmills, the forests. It was a very outstanding and successful workshop. And of course, this all melded together between them, the school teachers and the school kids, from one level or another. And that branched off, so that we had one course with Georgia State University, and I taught for them on the Appalachian Trail. That was another school of graduate students. We spent a week on the Appalachian Trail. They had other tasks. They were doing water testing and sampling and all kinds of stuff, very interesting. And I taught them mostly tree identification and whatever I could pick up wherever we would be. I remember one time I was taking them on the final. We had put our week in, and I was trying to pick out typical trees that they should have recognized. But I was changing, we were going down the mountain, and I had to be so careful because